The room was already thick with tension, a kind of static charge that every person could feel but no one dared to name. Cameras hummed, pens hovered above notepads, and all eyes shifted between the two women at the center of it all. Then, with the precision of a scalpel, Jessica Tarlov leaned forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Congresswoman Crockett," she asked, "where exactly did you earn your law degree?" The question seemed simple on its face, but everyone in the room knew better. This wasn't just a query about education. It was a test, a challenge, a moment designed to draw blood. The tone carried an edge, as though suggesting doubt, as though implying that Jasmine's hard-won accomplishments might not be real or worthy or good enough. For a heartbeat, the room froze. The fluorescent lights felt harsher, shadows deeper. Viewers watching at home leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something seismic was about to unfold. On social media, the clips were already being bookmarked, waiting to be unleashed with captions like, "Watch what happens next." Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in front of her. No visible flinch, no nervous shuffle, no dart of the eyes to the cameras. If anything, she seemed to grow taller in her chair. A calm presence radiated from her, the kind of composure that comes not from arrogance, but from certainty, the certainty of someone who has been tested all her life and has always emerged stronger. Across the table, Jessica waited, eyebrows raised, lips pursed. Her expression was polite but sharpened by that underlying skepticism. The silence between question and answer stretched longer than anyone expected. Whispers rippled through the room, subtle shifts in body language gave away the tension. It was as if the world itself leaned in closer. And then, just as anticipation reached its breaking point, Jasmine tilted her head ever so slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She inhaled slowly, deliberately, as though savoring the gravity of the moment. What came next would not only answer the question, but ignite a storm across the country. Her words would ripple far beyond this room, reaching millions who had waited too long to see dignity respond to doubt. What happened next would leave millions in awe and silence every critic. To the casual viewer, Jessica Tarlov's question might have seemed harmless, just another line in a routine exchange. But for those who live the reality of politics, especially women, and especially women of color, the undertone was unmistakable. The query about Jasmine Crockett's law degree was never just about a diploma. It was about legitimacy. It was about whether her voice, her service, her very presence at the table could be taken seriously. For decades, women in public life have faced this quiet but constant erosion of credibility. Every credential earned with sweat and sacrifice is still weighed on a scale tilted by bias. A man's degree is a credential. A woman, too often, it's questioned, doubted, second-guessed. And if that woman happens to be black, the skepticism doesn't just double, it multiplies. Jasmine knew this truth. So did millions watching her. The question hit with a sting familiar to anyone who has ever been underestimated, anyone who has had to work twice as hard to prove what should have been obvious from the start. And yet, where others might have felt cornered, Jasmine saw something else. To some, this was a trap. To Jasmine, it was a chance. The stakes in that instant stretched far beyond her alone. Every immigrant who had clawed their way into classrooms where they were told they didn't belong, every first-generation student who had been asked, "But are you really qualified?" Every woman in politics who had been dismissed as too emotional or too inexperienced. They were all suddenly sitting at that table with her. Her answer would not just defend her resume, it would defend theirs too. The cameras kept rolling. Screens across the nation flickered with the frozen still of Jasmine waiting, composed. Families gathered around their televisions. Workers on breaks glanced down at phones. College students streaming the hearing exchanged looks that said, "This is about us too." It was no longer just a congressional exchange. It was a cultural flashpoint. And in that silence before Jasmine spoke, people projected their own struggles onto her calm face. They remembered the teacher who doubted their potential, the boss who dismissed their ideas, the gatekeepers who demanded proof after proof after proof. The audience wasn't just waiting for Jasmine to answer Jessica. They were waiting for Jasmine to answer all of them. The weight was immense, but Jasmine did not show it. That was her power. Her stillness was not empty, it was steady. It was the unspoken declaration that her worth had never been up for debate. What Jessica had framed as a challenge to credentials became, in that moment, an opportunity for clarity. Here was a woman who carried not only a law degree, but the lived experience of countless others who had faced the same dismissals. Here was someone who understood that in politics, the most powerful weapon was not anger, not volume, but unshakable logic delivered with grace. And yet, for all of her composure, no one could have predicted the force of what was about to come. Viewers watching thought they knew what a standard answer might sound like: the nomming of a school, the citing of accomplishments, the usual list of accolades. But Jasmine was not about to give a standard answer. She was about to give an answer that redefined the moment entirely. And yet, no one expected the answer she was about to deliver. Long before Jessica Tarlov leaned forward with her cutting question, Jasmine Crockett had been navigating an environment where doubt was the default and skepticism was the soundtrack. For every achievement she had earned, there seemed to be a chorus ready to minimize it, twist it, or ignore it altogether. This was the political arena, a place where credentials were currency, yet not all currency was valued equally. Male colleagues could stumble through hearings, misquote the Constitution, even forget basic facts and still be shielded by a halo of authority. But when it came to Jasmine, the microscope was always sharper, the spotlight always harsher. Every step forward brought a fresh round of whispers. Is she really qualified? Did she really earn it? Does she even belong here? The antagonistic environment wasn't only about individuals, it was about a culture. A culture where arrogance thrived in polished suits, where systemic bias dressed itself as fair questioning, and where doubt was weaponized against anyone who didn't fit the mold of power. For critics who wanted to preserve their stronghold, Jasmine Crockett's rise wasn't just inconvenient, it was threatening. Her law degree became a favorite target, not because it was weak, but because it was strong. Strong enough to challenge the status quo, strong enough to dismantle arguments built on bluster instead of truth. And so, detractors picked at it like scavengers circling a feast. They wanted to reduce a lifetime of work to a single insinuation. Maybe she's not as legitimate as she looks. Jessica Tarlov's question was cut from this very cloth, though sharper, more deliberate. Jessica was not a caricatured villain. She was smart, poised, articulate. That's what made her skepticism sting all the more. She embodied a more refined form of doubt, polished, professional, dressed in the language of curiosity. It wasn't an outright attack, but the kind of challenge designed to look harmless while cutting deep. And yet the environment had been preparing Jasmine for this all along. She had faced louder critics before, the kind who shouted over her, dismissed her in headlines, or laughed behind closed doors. She had endured the smirks of those who believed law was a men's game, or that politics was reserved for pedigrees far different than hers. The arrogance of such voices became predictable, almost theatrical, the sneer, the condescension, the performative doubt. But systemic bias was the real antagonist, larger and more insidious than any one person. It was in the way networks covered her speeches compared to others. It was in the way audiences were primed to see a black woman in politics as angry if she defended herself, emotional if she showed passion, unqualified if she dared to stand firm. The villain wasn't just an opponent across the aisle or a rival on television. The villain was the weight of generations of stereotypes, the architecture of doubt designed to keep people like Jasmine in their place. And so, when Jessica Tarlov posed the question, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening in a room already saturated with centuries of dismissal. It was happening in front of cameras that would amplify not just Jasmine's answer, but the perception of her very existence as a leader. Critics waited, almost salivating, for the chance to pounce if she faltered, to declare that their suspicions had been right all along. The framing was sharp. Jessica represented a polished, intellectual form of challenge, but the echo chamber behind her represented something far uglier. It was arrogance disguised as curiosity, bias dressed up as reason. This was the villain archetype at work, not a single face but a system of doubt, weaponized against progress. And yet, even as the environment stacked itself against her, Jasmine's calm presence suggested something else entirely. She had been here before, not in this exact room, not under these exact lights, but in countless other spaces where people questioned her right to stand tall. She had faced professors who doubted her, colleagues who dismissed her, and adversaries who thought they could rattle her with a single well-placed barb. The question now hung in the air, but Jasmine's steady composure told a deeper story. She wasn't just answering Jessica Tarlov. She was answering every antagonist who had ever tried to reduce her to less than what she was. And in that moment, the environment itself shifted, as if preparing for a storm no one else could see coming. The critics were ready, the cameras were ready, the nation was ready. But Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to being underestimated. Before the lights, before the cameras, before her name carried the weight it does today, Jasmine Crockett's story was one stitched together by grit and persistence. She wasn't born into privilege or handed the keys to power. Her path was carved by long nights, relentless effort, and the stubborn belief that justice mattered, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. From a young age, Jasmine understood struggle. She grew up watching family and neighbors navigate a world that wasn't always fair, a world where the system could feel like an adversary instead of a protector. That awareness planted something in her, a quiet but unshakable determination. She didn't just want to survive within that system, she wanted to change it. School became her proving ground. While others questioned her drive, Jasmine buried herself in her studies, not out of vanity but out of necessity. She knew that knowledge was armor, that education was the only shield capable of deflecting the arrows of doubt. Nights when friends were out celebrating, Jasmine sat under a dim lamp, highlighters bleeding across thick textbooks, memorizing case law until exhaustion forced her to rest. There were times when the weight nearly broke her. Bills piled high, deadlines loomed, and whispers of "maybe this isn't for you" crept into her mind. But every obstacle only pushed her harder. When others might have quit, Jasmine found new reserves of strength. She worked jobs while studying, stretching every dollar, refusing to let financial hardship derail her ambition. Each sacrifice became part of the foundation she stood on, proof that persistence could outlast hardship. Law wasn't just a career choice, it was a calling. For Jasmine, the law represented more than statutes and precedents. It was a language of power, one she refused to let be spoken only by those who sought to exclude people like her. Every lecture, every exam, every paper submitted wasn't just about grades. It was about carving her name into a space where so many said she didn't belong. And when the day came that she walked across the stage to receive her law degree, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a testament to everyone who had been told they weren't good enough, weren't smart enough, weren't worthy of respect. That diploma was more than parchment and ink. It was persistence embodied. She carried that persistence into her career. Early in her legal practice, Jasmine didn't chase prestige, she pursued justice. She represented clients who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys, people whose stories mirrored her own. Every case became another battle against systems tilted against the vulnerable. There were victories, yes, but there were also defeats that cut deep. And yet, even in those losses, Jasmine found fuel. Each courtroom, each client, each long night poring over files reaffirmed why she had chosen this path. It wasn't glory that drove her. It was the faces of those who had no one else to fight for them. It was the belief that dignity was not negotiable, that justice was not optional. Her law degree was the key that opened the door, but her persistence was what kept her inside the room. That persistence carried her from courtrooms to the political arena, where the stakes grew higher but the mission remained the same. When she spoke, she carried not just her own story, but the stories of countless others. The immigrant who worked 3 jobs to put their child through school. The single mother who faced eviction but refused to let her children sleep on the streets. The young student who stayed up late memorizing flashcards in the glow of a borrowed lamp. Jasmine's voice was forged in their struggles as much as her own. Every doubt she faced became part of her preparation. Every dismissal became a rehearsal for moments like the one now unfolding before Jessica Tarlov. Because Jasmine knew, logic doesn't just silence arrogance, it dismantles it. And logic, delivered with calm certainty, was her sharpest weapon. To those watching that day, her calm silence before answering looked effortless. But beneath it was a lifetime of training, a lifetime of persistence disguised as poise. Her education was not just a credential to be checked off. It was proof of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every whispered doubt she had crushed beneath her determination. So when Jessica asked the question about her law degree, Jasmine didn't just hear skepticism about a school. She heard echoes of every moment she had been underestimated, every time someone tried to write her out of the story. And instead of bristling, she breathed. Instead of flinching, she smiled. Because Jasmine Crockett knew that this was more than a test of memory, it was the culmination of everything she had fought for. The law was her language, and persistence was her story. And in that moment, all of her life's preparation came into play. The silence after Jessica's initial question stretched across the room like a taut wire, vibrating with unseen pressure. For a brief instant, it seemed as if the entire chamber had forgotten how to breathe. And then, sensing that pause, Jessica leaned in once more, sharpening the edge of her words like a blade being honed against stone. "Congresswoman," she pressed, her tone smooth but unmistakably pointed, "we hear a lot about your positions, but the public deserves clarity. Which institution, precisely, awarded you your law degree? And what qualified you to step into these halls and shape the laws of this country?" The air shifted. This was no longer a simple question. It was an escalation. The framing was deliberate, designed to amplify doubt, to paint a picture of credentials in question. Jessica's delivery carried the polish of professionalism, yet beneath it lay the same undertone that so many had wielded against Jasmine her entire career. "Are you really qualified to be here?" Around the room, subtle reactions told the story. One staffer stifled a grin, sensing an opportunity for spectacle. A few skeptics leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, as if awaiting a stumble. Pens scribbled furiously across notepads, hungry for a headline. And in the back rows, whispers rippled like wind through tall grass. But Jasmine did not move. She sat with the same unshaken posture, hands folded neatly, gaze steady. If the question was meant to rattle her, it failed to leave even a trace. That calm unnerved some and emboldened others. A colleague glanced sideways at her, half admiring, half anxious. Could she withstand this without faltering? Jessica's eyes narrowed just slightly, as though to puncture the composure before her. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't sneering, but her persistence was its own performance, echoing the doubts of every critic watching from home. "Because, Congresswoman," she added, "when we speak about qualifications, transparency matters. Don't you agree?" The room pulsed with anticipation. The question had become a challenge, and the challenge had become a duel. This was no longer about the name of a school. It was about whether Jasmine Crockett could carry herself as more than a footnote, whether she could turn a weapon of doubt into a testament of strength. Viewers watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Students in dorm rooms fell silent, coffee cups froze in midair. Workers on lunch breaks exchanged knowing glances. This was the moment, the one that would either confirm suspicion or shatter it. Inside the chamber, the tension tightened its grip. A single cough echoed too loudly. A reporter's pen slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor, making half the room jump. Still, Jasmine remained centered, her calm presence pulling gravity toward her. Jessica's words lingered like smoke, demanding a response. The skeptics smirked, certain that hesitation meant weakness. The supporters clenched their fists, praying for precision. Every second felt like an eternity, the kind of stretch that precedes either collapse or triumph. And then Jasmine shifted, not much, just a subtle tilt of her head, a small adjustment that signaled the beginning of something. A flicker of a smile ghosted across her lips, a smile not of arrogance but of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The whispers quieted, the smirks faded. Even Jessica, sharp and unyielding, leaned back just slightly, as though bracing herself for whatever was coming next. The tension had reached its breaking point. The stage was set, the duel declared, the world waiting on a single voice to break the silence. Then with a calm smile, Jasmine opened her mouth, and everything changed. For a moment there was nothing, only the quiet hum of cameras and the muted rhythm of 1,000 expectant heartbeats. And then Jasmine spoke, her voice calm, steady, and sharpened by years of preparation. "You know, Jessica," she began, letting her words unspool with deliberate patience, "when people ask me about my law degree, I can't help but hear the echo of a deeper question. The question isn't just where I went. The question is whether they believe I belong here at all." The room stilled. It wasn't the answer anyone expected. It wasn't defensive, nor was it evasive. It was reframing classic courtroom strategy, the art of redefining the battleground. She paused, scanning the chamber, her eyes moving across skeptics and allies alike. "But since you asked, let's be perfectly clear. I earned my Juris Doctor from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. I earned it with the same grueling hours, the same relentless study, and the same late nights as any other attorney in this country. That's a fact." Her voice landed with weight, a gavel hitting its mark. Somewhere in the back row, a skeptic shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jasmine continued, her cadence now taking on the rhythm of cross-examination. "And let's talk about what that means, because a degree is not simply a piece of paper. It represents discipline. It represents sacrifice. It represents every obstacle I had to climb over just to sit in those classrooms, to take those exams, to argue those cases. And I did all of that not because it was easy, but because justice demanded it." She let the word justice hang in the air, its echo impossible to ignore. Jessica blinked, caught slightly off guard. Her question had been sharp, yes, but she hadn't expected this counterpunch. Not condescending, not bitter, but unflinching in its precision. Jasmine leaned in slightly, lowering her tone so that the room had to lean closer to catch every word. "And since we're being transparent, let me remind everyone here that the quality of a lawyer isn't determined by the name on their diploma. It's measured by the quality of their arguments, their ability to defend truth, and their willingness to fight for those without power. By those standards, my qualifications don't just meet the bar, they raise it." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some nodded, others stiffened. Even those inclined to dismiss her found themselves begrudgingly leaning in. She straightened, her calm demeanor now charged with quiet authority. "I have represented clients who couldn't afford representation. I have stood in courtrooms where the odds were stacked against justice, and I fought anyway. My law degree isn't an ornament, it's a weapon, and I have used it to defend the rights of people who would otherwise be crushed by the weight of a system designed to ignore them." Gasps, a few muffled claps before they were silenced by protocol. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression on her face. Jessica shifted, but this time the sharpness in her gaze was softened by something else: recognition. She had thrown a challenge, but what came back was a masterclass in composure. "And let's be very clear," Jasmine said, raising her voice just slightly, letting it carry. "When you ask me if I am qualified, I'll tell you this. I earned the right to be here not only through education, but through service, through sacrifice, through proving again and again that dignity and persistence will always outlast arrogance and doubt." Each word landed like hammer strikes against the edifice of skepticism. Even those inclined to oppose her could not deny the clarity, the sheer force of logic laced with conviction. She allowed herself another pause, the kind of silence that only someone in command of the moment can wield. Then she added, "So yes, I earned my law degree, but what matters more is what I've done with it. I've used it to fight for justice, and I will keep doing so whether critics believe I belong here or not." The chamber was electric. Supporters beamed, their pride barely contained. Detractors looked down, flipping pages they didn't need to read. And across the table, Jessica Tarlov, sharp and skilled herself, gave a subtle nod. She hadn't expected this answer, but she respected it. The foil had become a witness to the hero's strength. Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned back slightly, her voice now carrying a note of finality. "Because here's the truth, belonging isn't granted by critics. It's proven through persistence, and I have persisted every step of the way." For a long moment, silence held the room. It was not the silence of doubt, but of awe. Then came the reactions. A soft gasp from one corner, a hushed "that's right" from another. Social media was already ablaze. Clips of her words were being cut, captioned, and shared with lines like, "This is how you answer doubt," and "Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass." Even those who had tuned in skeptically felt the ground shift. The narrative was no longer about whether she was qualified. The narrative was about how brilliantly she had dismantled the question itself. Her calm had become her weapon, her words her armor. And in that chamber for those few minutes, doubt had no place to hide. Jessica, ever the professional, closed her notes and allowed a faint smile to cross her lips, not of triumph, but of respect. The duel she had initiated had become a showcase of dignity. And as the echoes of Jasmine's answer settled into the air, the room seemed transformed. The critics had no immediate rebuttal. The skeptics had no smug grins left to wear. All that remained was the resonance of truth delivered with calm precision. Jasmine Crockett had not only answered the question, she had redefined it. And yet, the ripple effect of her words was only just beginning. The silence that had filled the chamber was nothing compared to the roar that erupted online. Within minutes, Jasmine Crockett's words were cut, clipped, subtitled, and unleashed into the digital bloodstream. By the time she had walked out of the building, her name was trending across platforms in bold, unmissable letters. Crockett clapbacks surged to the top of Twitter. Instagram Reels replayed her calm smile frame by frame, and TikTok users layered her answer over beats, turning her poise into a soundtrack of defiance. What had begun as a pointed question in a hearing room had now become a cultural earthquake. One viral caption summed it up: "This is what grace under fire looks like." Another: "She didn't just answer the question, she ended the doubt." Millions of viewers replayed the clip, each time catching a new detail: the subtle nods from her allies, the faint flicker of surprise on her questioner's face, the quiet conviction in her tone. It was cinematic, and the world was watching. Fan edits appeared by the hour. Someone overlaid her words with black and white footage of civil rights leaders, turning her defense of her degree into a continuum of struggle and triumph. Another spliced her declaration: "My law degree isn't an ornament, it's a weapon," with flashing text: "Power, resilience, justice." On TikTok, a remix of her speech set to swelling orchestral music hit 500,000 likes in a day. But it wasn't just the internet's usual echo chamber. Politicians who had never mentioned her name before were suddenly tweeting about her composure. A celebrity with tens of millions of followers wrote, "Jasmine Crockett just schooled the nation on dignity." Late-night comedians replayed the exchange, but instead of jokes, they offered nods of admiration. "You know you've done something extraordinary," one host quipped, "when Twitter agrees for 5 whole minutes." News anchors, normally detached, let their own awe slip. "That was one of the most eloquent defenses of belonging I've heard in years," said one, her voice trembling slightly. Another network called it a mic drop moment destined for history books. And then came the ordinary voices, teachers writing about showing the clip in classrooms, young law students saying they finally felt seen, parents telling their daughters, "Watch this. This is how you stand tall." Thousands of immigrants echoed a common refrain. She spoke for us too. The comment sections overflowed with gratitude. As a woman in politics, I've faced the same questions. She just answered for all of us. I didn't know much about Jasmine Crockett before this, but now I'll never forget her. Finally, someone who doesn't just survive the attacks, she transforms them. Even some critics, grudgingly, admitted the undeniable. One commentator known for his sharp dismissals posted a single line: "I don't like her politics, but that was one hell of an answer." The momentum was staggering. By nightfall, hashtags linked her words to broader movements: women's empowerment, immigrant pride, the fight for representation. Her face became an emblem in memes that spread like wildfire, each one stamped with captions like "Belonging isn't granted, it's proven." The energy spilled offline, too. Murals began popping up in cities within days, Jasmine's likeness painted alongside quotes from her rebuttal. Activist groups announced campaigns inspired by her composure under fire. Even in quiet living rooms, families replayed the moment together, nodding, clapping, sometimes crying. This wasn't just viral content. It was a collective sigh of relief, a validation long overdue, a sense that someone had finally articulated what so many had lived but rarely seen voiced in such a high-stakes arena. And yet, beneath the admiration, questions lingered. What would this surge mean for her political trajectory? How would her critics regroup? Would this moment fade into the endless churn of the news cycle, or would it carve out something larger, something lasting? The answer wasn't clear, not yet, but the resonance was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett had ignited a conversation that stretched beyond herself, beyond the committee room, into the heart of a nation wrestling with who gets to belong, who gets to lead, and who gets to define the rules. But what did this moment truly mean for America's future? When the echoes of applause, online and off, began to fade, what remained was something more enduring than a viral clip. Jasmine Crockett's answer had crystallized a truth that cut across party lines, identities, and even personal histories. It was the undeniable reminder that dignity, intellect, and calm conviction will always rise above arrogance, bias, and dismissal. For generations, the question of who belongs in politics has been asked in whispers and shouts alike. Who is qualified? Who is worthy of being taken seriously? Too often, the answer has been filtered through prejudice. But Jasmine's moment rewrote the script. She didn't just prove her degree existed. She proved that the measure of a leader is not the paper on the wall, but the clarity of the mind and the resilience of the spirit. Her answer was not defensive, not bitter, not even angry. It was logical, precise, and unshakable. In doing so, she revealed something profound: that the most powerful rebuttal to prejudice is not rage, but reason delivered with the courage of someone who knows their worth is beyond question. In that answer, Jasmine spoke for every person ever doubted, for every young girl told she wasn't smart enough, for every immigrant asked if they really belonged, for every working-class student who carried textbooks heavier than their bank account, fighting for the right to be seen. Her words were not just hers. They were a chorus of voices that had long been silenced, suddenly amplified with the authority of national attention. And that is why the moment mattered, because it wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett's law degree. It was about the power of persistence, about the beauty of refusing to bow under pressure, about showing the world that credentials matter less than the courage it takes to stand tall when others want you small. In the days that followed, commentators tried to dissect it, explain it, reduce it to strategy. But for the millions who had watched live, and the millions more who saw it replayed across feeds and screens, it wasn't strategy. It was soul. It was the kind of soul that makes a people believe again, believe in representation, in justice, in the idea that politics could still be a place where truth could break through. Her answer became a mirror. Some saw in it their own struggles validated. Others saw the standard to which they would now hold their leaders. And many saw, for the first time, the simple yet profound truth that logic, grace, and preparation are mightier than insult, mockery, or disdain. And so the lesson rippled outward, that education is more than a credential, it is a tool of liberation. That calm logic is more than a debating tactic, it is the shield of those who refuse to be silenced. That dignity, carried with steady resolve, is not weakness but the greatest form of strength. What Jasmine showed was that history is not changed by the loudest insult, but by the clearest truth. And in politics, a field so often drowned in noise, her moment of crystalline clarity cut like lightning across the storm. The story of Jasmine Crockett's answer will be replayed for years not because it was viral, but because it was vindicating. It gave millions permission to say, "I belong, I matter, I will not be diminished." And yet, as powerful as the moment was, it was not the end. It was not even the peak. It was the spark of something larger, a movement still unfolding. Because if one answer could silence the doubt of millions, imagine what could happen when millions raise their own answers in unison. And yet, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a movement. Jessica Tarlov asked, Jasmine Crockett answered, millions listened. What began as a single question in a crowded chamber transformed into a defining moment, one that reminded America what true leadership looks like. Not in the sharpness of an insult, not in the volume of a voice, but in the strength of calm, unshakable truth. Her answer was more than a defense of her law degree. It was a defense of dignity itself. It showed that education is not just a credential, but a symbol of persistence. It proved that reason, delivered with grace, is more powerful than arrogance wrapped in doubt. And above all, it reminded us that when composure meets conviction, even the loudest critics fall silent. This is the lesson Jasmine Crockett gave to the nation, that you do not need to match insult with insult or bias with bitterness. The real victory lies in standing tall, steady, and certain, because dignity is louder than disrespect, and truth is stronger than any dismissal. Now the question turns to us. What will we do with this moment? Will we let it fade into the endless churn of headlines? Or will we carry it forward, turning her example into a standard, her courage into our own? If you believe that intelligence and composure can still win in politics, share this story. Let it inspire someone who feels unseen, someone who has been doubted, someone who is still fighting to prove their place. And if you want to be part of a community that refuses to be silenced, subscribe. Join the movement that says dignity will always triumph over arrogance, and truth will always cut through the noise. Because Jasmine Crockett's answer was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of ours.